The novel Dream of the Red Chamber begins with a metaphysical story about a piece of heavenly jade that is descended to earth. It is believed that this piece is linked to an ancient vow and was sent to settle an old emotional debt. This piece transforms into the character Jia Baoyu, the protagonist of the story. Baoyu is born into the Jia family, a noble family that is rich but experiencing a decline in social and financial status. It is mentioned that the jade stone placed in Baoyu's mouth at birth symbolized good luck for the Jia family and was considered part of the destiny that would accompany Baoyu throughout his life. The Jia family, despite being noble, is going through a phase of internal turmoil where their wealth starts to deteriorate due to poor resource management and internal conflicts between family members. Nevertheless, the family clings to a strict traditional system focused on preserving family honor and customs, where government positions and academic success are the standards by which a person is measured. Baoyu is the only son in the family and is characterized by his deep sensitivity and attachment to the arts, which is in stark contrast to the traditional expectations of his parents and relatives. He prefers poetry and imagination over becoming a successful government official, which causes disapproval from his family. He loves dreams and fantasy more than the reality imposed on him by his family. Baoyu has relationships with many women in his life, but two women stand out in particular: Daiyu and Baochai. Daiyu is Baoyu's cousin, a beautiful, quiet, and sensitive girl. She suffers from a chronic illness which makes her physically weaker than her peers, but her emotional and sensitive spirit attracts Baoyu's attention. Despite her ongoing suffering, Baoyu's relationship with her remains a deeply emotional one, filled with pain and longing. Baochai is another cousin, but she is the complete opposite of Daiyu. Baochai is more balanced, a smart and strong young woman who embodies the social perfection sought by the Jia family. She is seen as the ideal choice for Baoyu to marry from the family's perspective, as she possesses an attractive appearance and a calm, wise mind that signals her ability to manage family affairs with success. The events of the novel take place in the Grand Jia Mansion, which is like a self-contained world within the old city of Beijing. The mansion is filled with servants and attendants, and it exudes an air of luxurious extravagance. However, despite its outward brilliance, the mansion hides internal struggles and deep suffering. The lives of many characters, both men and women, intersect in this place, which represents the peak of luxury in Chinese society, but also reflects the tensions beginning to creep into the family's life. In this mansion, political and social conspiracies are woven, and emotional desires clash with family duties. Many characters, such as Baoyu and Daiyu, experience deep sorrow and confusion due to the social constraints imposed on them. Life in the mansion shows the contrast between the old traditions that govern everyone and the desires of individuals to break free. Although Baoyu lived in a mansion full of luxury and comfort, he experienced a constant feeling of inner emptiness. He saw no real value in social positions or power. Instead, he loved literature, poetry, and art, all of which he associated with a deeper spiritual life. Yet, at the same time, he felt that his family had placed a heavy burden of expectations on him, which he did not aspire to. Baoyu's view of life was full of inner conflict between the hope for a life full of beauty and poetry and the duty to his family and society. While Baoyu was struggling with this inner conflict, his relationship with Daiyu continued to develop. Despite her illness, Daiyu shared similar feelings of pain and isolation with him. She, too, felt the immense pressure from her family to follow social rules, but she yearned to escape into a world of greater freedom and love. Her relationship with Baoyu represented her only chance to express her deep feelings outside the constraints of her family. As time passed, problems within the Jia family continued to increase. The family's money began to run out, debts accumulated, and many of their possessions were lost. The Jia family began to fall from the peak of luxury into a period of poverty and turmoil. During these moments, the relationship between Baoyu and Baochai became more complicated, as he was asked to marry her to stabilize the family and restore its social standing. But despite all these expectations, Baoyu could not let go of his love for Daiyu. These emotional tensions continued to influence his life, becoming the central conflict in the novel. As the story progresses, the internal tensions within the Jia family increase. The family's financial collapse increasingly affects its members, and this is reflected in the growing anxiety that fills the mansion. Baoyu, despite still holding on to his dreams of poetry and art, becomes more preoccupied with his family's troubles. At this point, the events accelerate when Daiyu falls seriously ill, and her health begins to deteriorate rapidly. This event adds an emotional burden to Baoyu, who feels helpless in the face of his beloved's illness and suffers from regret for not being able to do anything about it. While Baoyu continues his emotional attachment to Daiyu, he is pressured by his family to marry Baochai, who represents the ideal choice for them. However, Baoyu, despite the expectations placed on him, remains loyal to Daiyu and cannot let go of his feelings for her. At the same time, Baochai shows no resistance to her family's plans. She knows that her life is directed towards serving her family's interests and cannot break away from the path laid out for her. Despite her beauty and wisdom, her personality represents the traditional values of the family, and she strives to present herself as the ideal wife, even though deep down she knows that Baoyu's heart belongs to Daiyu. The situation worsens when financial scandals begin to leak out of the mansion, and the Jia family's debts threaten their existence. These scandals become the target of the family's enemies, who are waiting for them to fail. Meanwhile, the financial collapse leads to drastic social changes, as many family members lose their positions and influence in society. The novel shows how these transformations deeply affect personal relationships within the family, creating an atmosphere of pessimism and despair. However, amidst these struggles, another development adds depth to the story. When Daiyu's health deteriorates suddenly, she is moved to another part of the mansion, away from Baoyu, which increases the feelings of sorrow and emptiness that he is experiencing. Baoyu, in his continued search for inner peace, begins to isolate himself from the outside world and contemplates life and death. His suffering increases when he realizes that his love for Daiyu may not be enough to stop fate. In this part of the novel, the complex characters of the individuals in the Jia family become more apparent. While Baoyu struggles with the emotional conflict between his love for Daiyu and his duty to his family, other characters like Daiyu and Baochai begin to reveal new dimensions of their personalities. Daiyu, despite her physical weakness, shows great spiritual strength in her suffering, while Baochai represents the stability and wisdom that Baoyu needs in his family's time of crisis. Tension builds as Baoyu, in a moment of clarity, discovers that his life may have been decided for him before he was born. In this conflict between fate and personal freedom, Baoyu's suffering becomes clearer as he begins to question the meaning of life and his true goals in a world full of heavy social expectations. As the challenges facing the Jia family continue to multiply, the novel delves deeper into the symbolic collapse of the family. The poverty that has struck the family and the decline of its reputation in society not only indicate an economic collapse, but also reflect the breakdown of the family's personal and moral values, which had previously represented them. In this context, other characters are also presented in a new light. Characters like Jia Linian and Jia Xiaobai embody different trends within the family. Jia Linian's character is shown to us in a way that reveals how individuals can be trapped in inner conflicts between their personal desires and the social pressures imposed on them. As the events continue to unfold, Baoyu's fate becomes clearer as the family begins to retreat on all fronts. Facing the collapse of the family, Baoyu begins to take radical steps toward himself, but at the same time, he discovers that he may not be able to change the course of events. The story continues to escalate its tensions, as it appears that the family faces even more decline and difficulties. With the financial crisis deepening, the internal conflicts between the older generation, who cannot meet the traditional social expectations, and the younger generation, who try to live according to their personal principles, intensify. The beginning of the collapse. As the financial and social problems of the Jia family escalate, the pressure on Baoyu to conform to a predetermined fate increases. He cannot escape the family's traditions, which want him to marry Baochai, despite his deep emotional attachment to Daiyu. However, the family does not understand the suffering Baoyu feels because of the pressure they are placing on him, and he continues to reflect on his life and destiny. At the same time, Daiyu's condition sharply deteriorates, and her illness takes a dangerous turn. Despite her deep love for Baoyu, her health circumstances make it impossible for her to live a normal life with him. As Baoyu loses hope for any kind of stability, he continues to reflect on his life choices and ways he might escape this tragic reality. Life in the mansion and family transformations. The turning point in the novel comes when the Jia family begins to spiral into deep social decline. The Jia family slowly disintegrates from within, as its members suffer from the loss of financial power and social influence. Part of their property is seized, which severely impacts their reputation. This period shows the twists of reality, as the deterioration of the family's wealth mirrors the spiritual and emotional decline of its members. While family members are preoccupied with their financial and personal problems, Baoyu, who grew up in a world of luxury and comfort, experiences an inner emptiness. Despite living in a grand mansion full of opulence, he feels isolated, as his relationships with his family and with Daiyu and Baochai fail to bring him the inner peace he had been seeking his whole life. Baoyu's inner journey. In one of his moments of reflection, Baoyu decides to isolate himself from everyone in his quest for the truth and meaning in his life. He becomes more withdrawn and refuses to live according to social expectations, deciding to live in a way that reflects his true inner identity, rather than merely fulfilling the needs of others. Through this isolation, Baoyu begins to deeply contemplate his thoughts. He realizes that his life is full of conflict between his emotions and his duties. In a moment of clarity, he experiences a kind of internal liberation. But this liberation comes too late. He begins to accept the idea that his life may have been predetermined, and that he may not have the full choice in changing his fate. Death and symbolism. As her health deteriorates, Lin Daiyu dies after a long period of suffering, causing a major emotional shock for Baoyu. Her death is a pivotal moment in the novel. Her death highlights the deep divide between life and death and reaffirms the theme of mortality that runs throughout the story. Despite his deep love for her, Baoyu realizes that love alone cannot combat death or change their fate. At the same time, the Jia family begins to gradually lose its position, and hopes of rebuilding their wealth fade. Everyone faces their inevitable fate, but they are constantly reminded that everything in life is but a passing phase. The end of the novel. In the end, Baoyu is isolated from all those he loved and cared for. When his moment of death comes, he is in a state of spiritual peace, reflecting his deeper understanding of life and death. The novel ends with Baoyu's death under mysterious circumstances, with a large part of his life coming to a close with a moment of reflection on life and the inevitable fate. Baoyu faces death with serenity and inner peace, far from the struggle he had endured in life. The novel does not provide a completely happy or satisfying ending, but it raises profound questions about life and fate. Baoyu's journey represents the continuous search for inner peace in a world filled with endless struggles and expectations. While Baoyu's life was filled with pain and conflict, the novel ultimately shows us that this conflict is a part of life itself. In death, Baoyu reaches a kind of true understanding, which he had been searching for throughout his life. The novel concludes with words that remind the reader that life, like love and death, is but a dream in the end.